Welcome back to another Stand on Guard episode. When we come back, what the hell is wrong with Canada's military today?
So we are in a very precarious position in this country. We need political change, but we also need the resolve to resist.
Yes, please like the show, give us a thumbs up, subscribe if you need to, if you can. Resubscribe if you need to, I should say. A lot of people are getting unsubscribed, and we're nearing 26,000 when I hit 30,000 in another month. That's my goal. I think if we get some acceleration going, we can do it. But I've talked about the military quite a bit. As you know, I served in the Canadian Armed Forces in what is again called the Royal Canadian Air Force. I was an Air Force officer, hence my ensign here. So I am as pro-military as anybody, but I don't like what's happened to our military. I don't like what's happening to our military, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Because I think we need a viable military in Canada. And the thing is, we always had, well, we used to have one of the best militaries in the world. Even when our equipment wasn't the best, our personnel were the best. And you heard that from our allies, whether it was our closest ally, the United States, or our second closest in Great Britain. But all of our NATO allies would always say, you can always count on Canada to be well trained and ready to do the job. And they know what they're doing. And we had the best pilots in the world. And that's true. We used to go down and win the Top Gun competition because we had pilots who were well trained. Training was important, and we did things well. Even if our equipment was like 10 years behind at times, and it usually has been, we always did the best job possible. And we could always be proud of that. Well, I don't know what's going on with the military today. And just a little before I get into the state of Canada's military, my personal story. When I left the military, I went to the House of Commons to work for the Reform Defence Critic, Art Hanger, a wonderful member of Parliament from Calgary Northeast. And he, like a second father to me. Art was a wonderful man, a spiritual, godly man who meant what he said and was completely honest. He wasn't like a politician. And he fought for the military. But I used to have to tell Art and the Reform Party in those days is don't criticize the people in the military. They're doing the job they're told to do. They're following the orders they have to follow. Go after the politicians. And remember, it's always the politicians. Go after them and the politically self-serving generals who do the bidding of the politicians, specifically the prime minister and the defense minister. All they want to do is retire and get a great job in the military industrial complex. You heard that clip the other day about what's happening in the States. Or they want a job as the head of an airport. So that's what I always said, and we have to always bear that in mind. Always bear that in mind. But what's going on with today's military? And I hope I'm not going to scare anybody away with this. Like I just told you the other day, here's Andrew Leslie, former lieutenant general, retired. He was the chief of staff of the Canadian Army. And his last position was chief of transformation, which was sort of a silly post that was created to once again appease politicians. But, I think you have to say his heart is in the right place today because he's saying the Canadian military is in deep trouble. And he's pointing out the fact that we don't have any ammunition left because we've given it all to Ukraine and we can't replace it. And I just heard yesterday, the United States is in the same position. They can't replace the ammunition, the 105 millimeter shells they've dished out to Ukraine. They've given it all away and they can't replace it. Canada can't even begin to replace it. The United States is probably about 2 years behind replacing its equipment that it's given out to Ukraine. We call it a loan. It's gone. It's destroyed. Even the Leopard tanks we gave away are destroyed because Justin Trudeau uses the military for political ends. You can argue every prime minister has done that, but nobody has done it in such a profoundly obscene way as the unalloyed, narcissistic Justin Trudeau, who will use the military any day of the week to advance his own agenda. And don't listen for a minute about, we're going to meet our 2% GDP. Trudeau has no intention of bringing the military up to caliber because he'd rather spend the money elsewhere, and he doesn't like the military per se. So this is why when you hear about military spending, it's always 5 or 10 years down the road because they don't really intend to do it. And when you plan that far in advance, there's never any guarantee that any government's going to come through with that funding because the current government isn't going to be there anymore. It could be an entirely different government, probably will be an entirely different government with an entirely different military planning apparatus, with a whole different series of objectives, a different defense policy. So all of that promise, all of those promises that we're going to spend X billion dollars on this project and we're going to increase the budget here, it's all fantasy because future governments never deliver. And this is what's wrong with Canada. There's no plan. Now, I'm going to get off this here because this is really not the gist of what I want to talk about today. What I want to begin with is the story of the hour, perhaps indicting the worst defense minister Canada has ever had, Harjit Sajjan. He resigned in disgrace from the military. He basically was, reassigned by Justin Trudeau to a safer emergency preparedness, this is a guy who's not prepared for any emergency. But he had the gall to tell the special forces to rescue Afghan Sikhs, make them a priority above Canadians and above the Afghans who were assisting the Canadian forces in Afghanistan. This is obscene. This is obscene because it's all about politics. I mentioned this the other day, but we know now, based on a story I'll share with you in a minute, why this is obscene politics. Let's listen to how Sajjan tries to justify this absolute obscene act.
The Globe article quite directly, because I'll be honest with you, it was utter BS. Those who were following the evacuation missions and then events of previously to that know quite well that there was an approved government policy to safely evacuate as many vulnerable Afghans as possible, which included obviously Canadians first, those who worked with us like our interpreters, and it also included vulnerable Afghans, which included religious minorities like the Afghan Sikhs and Hindus. And I can assure you, all effort was done to carry this out and do it in as safe as possible manner, and to get as many people out as possible as well.
The CBC's Janice McGregor is covering this for us from Ottawa, and she has more on the Globe and Mail's report and how Sajjan is responding to it.
That's right. At several points, when reporters were trying to clarify exactly what the minister did here, he, instead of answering directly with his own kind of voice, he referred people to a lengthy kind of 2-page statement that has been circulated to the media since this morning and was given also to the Globe and Mail, and aspects of that included in the Globe and Mail's report today. No one is disputing that the Afghan group that is the subject of this story was eligible for evacuation under a government policy. The issue at hand was whether specific special forces resources were directed to sort of try to meet up with this group and facilitate their access to the airport, as opposed to other things that the special forces needed to be doing to facilitate the evacuation of other people on the priority list, which of course at the top is Canadian citizens, then permanent residents, then individuals in Afghanistan to whom Canada, its government, its aid organizations, its media organizations had a direct responsibility to try to keep safe. People who had worked as interpreters and drivers. The protection of other religious minorities who no one is disputing were vulnerable, visibly vulnerable. If you're talking about a Sikh living in Afghanistan, subject to violence, that had been known for months by this point, that they were not going to be safe now that sort of the Taliban had taken over Kabul. Yes, they were eligible, but sort of there was kind of an articulation of sort of a hierarchy, if you will. And what the Globe and Mail was reporting, that through a direct intervention, a text message from the minister providing information to the military as a result of that, military sources telling the newspaper that there was a lot of anger in the military ranks about having to sort of go and try to find this particular group of Afghans who weren't even Canadian citizens and didn't have a direct kind of tie to Canada, when they were trying to focus desperately instead on sort of others that they were trying to evacuate. That's the nub of the story.
Yeah. So you're wondering why I'm so mad about this? Because I think this story is indicative. It's emblematic of the corruption in Canada's military. This is really, really incredibly, almost unbelievable that this would go on. We left over 100 Canadians in Afghanistan at the mercy of the Taliban, while special forces were rooting out these Afghan Sikhs. Yeah, rooting out the Afghan Sikhs. And why do you suppose Sajjan wanted to rescue these Sikhs? I mean, is he that? Does he think that world Sikhism is that important that you have to put Sikhs anywhere in the world above Canadians? That it's more important than the operation? Is that what he really believes? Because he's the Canadian defense minister. He's supposed to be rescuing Canadians, Canadian Forces personnel, Canadian Embassy personnel, and then the Afghans who were assisting them. That was the priority. Anybody who's ever worn a uniform knows as soon as a civilian minister speaks, sends a message, writes a memo, makes an order, that order is followed, unless it's an illegal order. And of course, here there's some wiggle room because he can say, well, they were eligible to be rescued because they're a religious minority in Afghanistan that could be subject to persecution. So I didn't really do anything wrong. Of course he did. He failed Canada. And this is utterly corrupt. So why do you think he bent this far backwards for Afghan Sikhs? I'll tell you why. Thank God Bob Fife, my old friend Bob Fife at the Globe and Mail, and Stephen Chase are chasing down this story even more because there was some pushback from Sajjan. God knows he has no right to complain about anything. He was an incompetent minister who had the gall to brag about being a hero in Afghanistan. Totally fabricated story. He's no hero. So why was he doing this? Because Afghan Sikh sponsors donated to his riding association at the same time he was airlifting Afghan Sikhs out. Do you call that corrupt? Do you call that disgusting? Yes. That's what he's all about. Now, the Globe, Harjit Sajjan failed Canada and Canadians. He has utterly failed Canada and Canadians. And I couldn't agree more with this. Now, maybe that's why we're having recruitment problems. Maybe it's also because what the hell has happened to Canada's military today? I saw this story because I couldn't believe the dress and deportment had gotten this bad. This is a ranks sailor. I don't know what his name is, and it's not important. He was part of the he was illustrative of the story. But that's what you're allowed to look like in the Canadian military today. Grow your hair long, have a funky mustache, tattoos on your face, even nail polish, no problem, even for men. Doesn't matter what color. Yeah, it's a woke military. And of course, they found out that a large proportion of the military rank and file did not like these changes. They said this is BS. Because when you join the military, if you don't know it already, you join it because you have to make sacrifices. You have to be different than the rest of the country. You don't have the same rights when you're in uniform. You're on 24/7 call. And you're subject to the code of service discipline as well as the regular laws of Canada. And you should be expected to cut your hair short, shave, and wear the uniform with pride. Is it any wonder why we are having recruitment problems in the military? I wouldn't want to join today with all this BS going on, with all this crap going on. I mean, it's a woke military, and this is just the part of it. And I mean, tampons in the men's room. You can't even say a prayer at Remembrance Day because, well, that might offend somebody. Anything goes in terms of idiosyncrasies in dress, in hairstyle. They recently have scaled it back because so many people were complaining, and it became a hindrance to recruitment. But it's just the tip of the iceberg, folks. It's because the military has always been a laboratory, a lab for social experimentation. Whatever the government wants to put out for the whole country, whatever the government wants to stick the whole country with, they try it first on the military because they are completely willing pawns. They might be unwilling in their mind, but they have to follow orders. So they have to take it. They have to be the experiment. And I tell you, most of them just hate it. And this has been going on for years. I mean, we had quotas back in the years of Jean Chrétien. They talked about having the Navy 20% Aboriginal or Indigenous, as we would say today. Now, how stupid is that? If you can find that many Indigenous people who want to join the Navy, wonderful, and they meet the standard, great. But to set a quota that somehow we're going to make the Navy 20% Indigenous because that sounds like a good idea, insane. They were talking about 50% of the combat arms, the infantry and artillery and armor being female. Most females don't want to do that. And that is the point. And what the Trudeau government has done to Canadian history, he has denigrated Canadian history to the point of who is so proud of Canada now they want to fight for it. Trudeau has destroyed our heritage and our history. He's apologized repeatedly because Canada has always been wrong. All of our prime ministers in the past were wrong because they were too white, too heterosexual, too male. They were just the wrong type of people. So what is Canada all about? Was Canada a great country? You bet it was a great country. And this is why we need to make Canada great again when Justin Trudeau is no more, at least as a political leader. I got a few more things to go through here. Now, Bill Blair, God help us. I don't think I put my Bill Blair. But Bill Blair, of course, was recently trying to explain what the Canadian Navy, Royal Canadian Navy, was doing in Cuba. Well, they were there serving the Russian warships and liaising with their American allies. BS. They were there to have a good time showing the Cubans how to conga. That's what the state of our military is today. And the ministers, the last three ministers have been routinely bad. But I would say Anita Anand, who followed Sajjan and preceded Bill Blair, was probably the best of the three. She's the least of three evils. She seemed to at least take the job a little bit seriously. But once again, you're dealing with a Trudeau cabinet that is mediocre at the best of times and incompetent at other times. So now, of course, we're looking at a female chief of defense staff, Lieutenant General Jenny Carignan. I don't know Jenny Carignan. I have no idea if she's qualified for the job. I hope she is. She should be. But once again, just like Trudeau did with the RCMP, this is Trudeau putting politics first. This is Trudeau trying to be woke enough. Time to have a woman lead the Canadian Armed Forces. I hope she's as good as her biography claims. And I hope this is not just another, shall we say, political selection. I hope it's not. I've worked for great women in the Canadian Armed Forces. I've worked with them. I had one or two women above me in terms of seniority or rank, and I had other women who worked for me. And I can't think of a single one who didn't do their job with their utmost capability and wasn't proud to wear the uniform. And I had no problem working with them. I'm just not like that. But I don't believe in anyone being promoted simply on the basis of sex or gender. I don't believe anybody should get the top post in the Canadian Armed Forces or the Royal Canadian Mounted Police simply because they're a woman. And I think the experiment with the RCMP proved to be a disaster. And I won't go through that whole story. But clearly, that was a political appointment, and she was working hand in hand with the Trudeau government on gun control. And we know that. What about the current Chief of Defense Staff? Oh, yes. Wayne Airhead. Oh, excuse me. I mean, Wayne Air. General Wayne Air. Did I say Airhead? My goodness. Well, look at this one here. This is an article in the National Post where the good general, outgoing general, and they always say when these kind of things when they're on the way out, buckle up, Canada, we're on the cusp of war. Well, what the hell have you been doing for the past 3 years? If we're on the cusp of war, have you been doing anything to avert it, to stop it? You're supposed to be there not to get us into a war, but to ensure we don't have a war. And you've done nothing at all, except preside over this. If we can get back to it here. You presided over this. That's what you've done as Chief of Defense Staff. You've done your social experimentation, and you show up cue ball, you show up at these events at bases looking real tough and a man of decision. I bet you can't decide when to go to bed at night. And this is the kind of people who lead the Canadian Armed Forces today, who think it's all about just making it easy for people to get in. Lower the standards, and people will flock to the Canadian Armed Forces. Well, guess what, Wayne? Hasn't happened. And so while you're planning for a war with Ukraine, doing nothing to stop the harvesting of weapons in Canada so they can go to Ukraine and get destroyed, you're saying nothing about not having a war in Ukraine with NATO soldiers. You're saying nothing about the danger, the threat of having the Third World War. That will be a nuclear war with Russia. You're saying nothing about that because you're following your political masters and you've got your eyes on retirement and what you get when you retire. What kind of a job you got going for you, Wayne? I'd like to know. I'd like to know where you're going. Yeah, because I know all about the Conference of Defense Associations. I know all about that network that exists for retired generals. And I know you're all taken care of. Just don't rock the boat. Don't say anything that the Prime Minister's not going to like. And you certainly haven't done that, have you? You have not done that. So in conclusion here, and I thank you all for watching, your patience here. This has been a bit of a rant today. Been a bit of a rant. But I'm still proud of my service. And I know most people who put on a uniform are proud of their service. And they just want the government to leave them alone in terms of their social beliefs, their religious beliefs, their political beliefs. Stop telling them what to do in terms of believing. Give them operational instructions. Give them military orders. But stop trying to tell them what to think and what to believe. You've been doing that for far too long. And it's no wonder for me, I'll say it again, why recruitment is so hard. You lower the standards and people are going to say, I don't want to belong to that jumped up organization calling itself the Canadian Armed Forces. It's inferior. It's become a laughing stock. It's become a joke because politics has ruined it and politicians have ruined it. And I can't say that with enough emphasis. And when we have chief of defense staffs who are out there saying we've got to lower the standards in terms of dress and deportment because more people will come into the military, I think we've got a problem. I think we have a severe problem. And we have defense ministers as weak and shallow as Harjit Sajjan and Bill Blair, then we've got a problem. There's no redemption for Canada's military right now. And I pity the people who want to stay in and do their jobs, who believe in freedom, who believe in defending Canada. I pity those people because they're not getting the support they need from the top. And they never will, as long as we have a government like the Trudeau government, as long as we have governments that insist upon using the military for political purposes, for political expediency, and just saying to hell with these good people who just want to defend Canada, put on a uniform, do their job, and they're proud to do so. Thanks for watching today. And I think if we get a change of government, we'll have a change in the military. It needs to be a big change because small token amendments will not suffice. We need radical change in the military, back to operational focus, back to good order and discipline, back to dress and deportment that is special, back to standards that are above the norm, back to people who are in shape and not 60 pounds overweight so they can do their job. Canada's military needs to change. And let's hope we get that soon. Thanks for watching, folks. Thank you for watching this episode of Stand on Guard and being a part of the KRAYDEN'S Right channel. If you've watched this episode to this point, you've watched it all. And that's really important for a small station like this. We always say subscribe, hit the bell, be a part of the KRAYDEN resistance. Resolve to resist. That's what we're doing. And if you become a subscriber, if you're a supporter of this station or a member through Substack, through YouTube, and now you can be a local as well, that's so important to us because I couldn't do this without you. I made a decision to become an independent journalist about a year ago because I wanted to bring all of my experience in the military, in journalism, to you. I don't promise anything I can't deliver. I don't offer clickbait. I offer truth. The truth is out there, and it's my job to bring that truth to light and to you. Thanks for being a part of the KRAYDEN'S Right resistance, and we'll see you again soon.
So we are in a very precarious position in this country. We need political change, but we also need to resolve to resist.